You lie awake in the stillness of the night, your mind racing with thoughts that seem to pull you deeper into a whirlpool of emotion. Despite the peace around you, there is one person who occupies your thoughts in an almost intrusive way. Their image is not just in your mind, it is dominant. You see their face, hear their voice, feel their presence, even when they aren't physically there. You've tried to push them aside, to focus on something else, but the more you try, the more they persist, like an uninvited guest in your consciousness. You might tell yourself that you're overthinking, or that it's simply a passing phase, but the truth lingers like a heavy weight in your chest. It's not just the fleeting memories that come and go, it's the unrelenting nature of your thoughts. The feeling that this person has taken up permanent residence in your mind, refusing to leave, regardless of your will or intention. Here's the paradox. Why is it that no matter how much you try to focus on other aspects of life, your mind continues to return to them? And why, when your rational mind knows that this obsession is unhealthy, can you not seem to stop it? Why does someone who may not even be physically present have such an undeniable pull on your emotional and mental state? You've been taught to think that if you just ignore it, if you bury those thoughts deep enough, they will go away. You may have tried distractions, work, hobbies, socializing, but the more you try to avoid this person in your mind, the more they seem to appear, like an echo in the depths of your psyche. This unsettling experience leads to a deeper question, one that demands to be answered. Why does the mind hold on to certain people, places, or feelings in this way, despite our attempts to let go? Could it be that the thoughts you try to suppress are not as random as they seem, but actually a reflection of something deeper, something within you? Is it possible that your mind's obsession with this person is a projection of unresolved emotions, hidden desires, or parts of yourself that you have yet to fully understand? As you contemplate this question, the truth starts to reveal itself, not as a clear-cut answer, but as a profound realization. This isn't just about the other person. It is about the self, your inner desires, your needs, your fears, and your attachments. This internal struggle is not an isolated event, but part of a larger philosophical question about the nature of the self and how we relate to the world around us. Arthur Schopenhauer, the 19th century philosopher, provides insight into this very issue, arguing that human beings are driven by powerful forces of desire and will. What if the reason this person is constantly on your mind isn't just because you care about them, but because they represent something deeper within you, something your conscious mind hasn't yet fully confronted? This paradox, the contradiction between your desire to let go and the persistent return of thoughts about someone, is at the heart of Schopenhauer's philosophy. He believed that our will, the force that drives our desires and motivations, is often blind to the deeper truths about our existence. Our thoughts, emotions, and attachments, particularly when it comes to others, are shaped by a force that transcends reason. It is through understanding this deeper layer of ourselves that we can begin to uncover the truth behind why someone always seems to occupy our mind. As you wrestle with these thoughts, you realize that the answers may not lie in rationalizing the situation or simply trying to forget this person. Instead, it may be necessary to explore why they are so deeply embedded in your psyche, why they've become an obsession, why your mind is unwilling to release them. To understand why someone is always on your mind, we must first dive into the psychological and philosophical forces that shape our desires, thoughts, and attachments. Schopenhauer's theory of the will provides a profound framework for understanding the inner turmoil that drives our persistent thoughts about a particular person. It is not simply a matter of liking someone too much or being overly sentimental. It is the very nature of our will and how it manifests in our mental and emotional states. Schopenhauer, in his seminal work, The World as Will and Representation, proposed that human existence is governed by a will, a blind, unconscious force that drives all living beings to strive for things they desire, to reach goals, and to satisfy their needs. For Schopenhauer, the will is the root of all suffering. It is the source of our desires, our passions, and our struggles, and it never rests. The more we satisfy one desire, the more new desires arise, creating a cycle of endless striving and dissatisfaction. The will is insatiable. It constantly demands more, and as we pursue one goal after another, we rarely pause to question why we are driven so fiercely. In Schopenhauer's view, the will does not simply exist at the surface of our conscious thoughts. It resides in the deepest parts of our being, influencing our very sense of self. The fact that you can't seem to get this person out of your mind is not due to mere infatuation or emotional attachment. Instead, it is because the will has latched onto this person as a means of fulfilling a deeper, often unconscious desire within you. This person represents something your will believes it needs in order to feel complete or fulfilled. And the more you chase this need, the more it occupies your thoughts, constantly pushing itself into your conscious awareness. From a psychological perspective, this phenomenon can be understood through the lens of attachment theory, which explores how individuals form emotional bonds and how those bonds influence their thoughts, behavior, and well-being. According to attachment theory, when a person forms a strong emotional connection, especially in childhood or formative years, that bond can become an unconscious anchor in their emotional life. Even into adulthood, these early patterns of attachment shape how we view love, intimacy, and connection. When we become deeply fixated on someone, the attachment isn't merely about the individual's characteristics. It is about what they represent to us on a deeper emotional level. A person who occupies our thoughts may unconsciously embody qualities we lack or desire: love, validation, security, or emotional warmth. Schopenhauer would argue that these attachments arise from the will's desire to complete itself, to feel whole or fulfilled. However, the will's desire is never truly satiated. Like a bottomless pit, it demands that we continually search for external sources of validation or satisfaction. The mind, therefore, is constantly drawn to what it believes it needs to feel complete. The more the mind fixates on this person, the stronger the association becomes between their presence and your sense of fulfillment. And yet, this fulfillment remains elusive. Every time you reach for this person, your inner drive becomes even more intense, setting up a vicious cycle of attachment and longing that consumes your thoughts. This phenomenon can also be viewed through psychoanalytic theory, specifically the idea of projection. According to Sigmund Freud and later Carl Jung, we often project our unconscious desires, fantasies, and unmet needs onto others. When we become preoccupied with someone, it is often because we are projecting our inner world onto them. We may imbue them with qualities or traits that we wish to see in ourselves or in our lives. In essence, we turn them into a mirror of our internal desires and unresolved emotions. Jung's concept of the anima, the unconscious feminine aspect in men, and animus, the unconscious masculine aspect in women, offers another lens through which to understand this phenomenon. When we obsess over a person, especially someone with whom we may have a deep emotional connection, it's as though we are subconsciously projecting an idealized version of who we wish we could be onto them. This projection not only heightens our emotional attachment, but also makes it difficult to break free, as the person has now come to represent an idealized version of the self that we cannot fully attain. This creates a psychological trap. The more we project our desires onto someone, the more we begin to believe that our happiness, our fulfillment, or our identity is tied to them. This projection traps us in an unrealistic view of the person. We begin to see them not as who they truly are, but as the embodiment of our own unmet needs. The deeper our attachment grows, the harder it becomes to differentiate between our own desires and the person in question. Schopenhauer's philosophy touches on another critical element of this internal struggle, the tension between freedom and attachment. Schopenhauer believed that true freedom could only be achieved when we detach ourselves from the constant cycle of desire and the will that drives us. The problem is, as human beings, we are hardwired to crave connection, validation, and love. Attachment is not only natural, it is part of the human experience. But Schopenhauer argued that true freedom and peace can only come when we let go of these attachments, when we cease to depend on external sources for our happiness and fulfillment. This conflict between attachment and freedom lies at the heart of why someone might always be on your mind. The very act of clinging to this person, relying on them to fulfill your desires, binds you, not just to them, but to the cycles of desire and suffering that Schopenhauer described. The more you attach yourself to someone as a source of meaning or fulfillment, the more you unknowingly trap yourself in a world governed by the very forces that are keeping you from inner peace. But Schopenhauer's answer to this struggle is both liberating and difficult. True liberation comes from letting go of desire, not the desire for things, achievements, or even relationships, but the desire for perfection or fulfillment through external means. Only when we stop chasing after these external sources of validation can we begin to find peace. This is where the deeper consequences of our fixation on others reveal themselves. When we are constantly driven by attachment and desire, we are never truly free. The more we long for someone, the more we become enslaved to that longing. The person becomes a symbol of everything we think we need to be complete, but they also become the very thing that keeps us from freedom. This is the tragic irony of attachment. The more we chase after what we believe will fulfill us, the more trapped we become by the very thing we desire. Now that we've uncovered the psychological and philosophical forces driving the fixation on a particular person, it's time to explore the unseen consequences of this persistent obsession. Though it might feel like a harmless preoccupation, the effects of constantly having someone on your mind ripple outward, influencing not only your emotional well-being, but your relationships, your sense of identity, and the way you navigate the world. The most insidious consequence of obsessive fixation is the erosion of self-identity. When you focus so intensely on one person, you risk losing touch with your own sense of who you are. As Carl Jung would argue, the individual is often influenced by the desires and projections of others. In this case, your identity becomes less about who you genuinely are and more about who this person represents in your life. You begin to define yourself in relation to them. I am the one who loves them, or I am the one they care for. Over time, this relationship can obscure the deeper layers of your identity, leaving you feeling fragmented and unclear about your true self. In Jungian terms, this is the loss of individuation, the process by which a person discovers and integrates the full spectrum of their unconscious being. Individuation is crucial to psychological health because it enables individuals to find their true essence. However, when we are consumed by the need for another person to fulfill us, we abandon this process of self-discovery. Our minds, instead of becoming richer and more complete, become narrowed as they revolve around the fantasies and projections we place onto others. We live through them rather than through ourselves. In this state, you begin to lose the autonomy and agency necessary to thrive as an individual. Your happiness, your sense of accomplishment, and even your emotional balance become contingent on someone else's presence, approval, or affection. The essence of who you are becomes secondary to the illusion of completeness that you believe they provide. Over time, this sets up a damaging psychological framework where your self-worth is solely dependent on external validation. The consequence is profound. You can no longer trust yourself because you've outsourced your sense of self to another person. The constant presence of another in your mind fosters emotional dependency. Perfectionism, which often accompanies attachment to others, demands that they meet certain ideals or expectations in order for you to feel complete. The higher the stakes of this imagined perfection, the deeper the emotional dependency. When the other person does not meet these expectations, whether through absence, rejection, or failure to meet your idealized view of them, the emotional fallout can be devastating. This dependency leads to anxiety, a persistent, low-level hum of fear that accompanies the thought of losing this connection. If someone occupies your mind constantly, you become highly sensitive to their words, actions, and the smallest shifts in their behavior. You begin to overanalyze every interaction, searching for signs of approval or rejection, constructing emotional narratives that fuel your fear. The more you depend on this person for emotional stability, the more fragile your sense of self becomes. The greater your attachment, the greater the anxiety that comes with the idea of losing them or falling short of their expectations. Schopenhauer's philosophy illuminates this emotional turmoil. He believed that the human will, while capable of extraordinary determination, is also the source of excessive suffering. When you allow the will to attach itself to something external, whether a person, an object, or a goal, you risk endless suffering when that external object fails to live up to your expectations. This continual cycle of hope, fulfillment, and disappointment is what Schopenhauer saw as the foundation of human suffering. Dependency breeds anxiety, and anxiety, when left unchecked, undermines your peace and emotional health. Another profound consequence of having someone constantly on your mind is the distortion of relationships. When you project all your desires, hopes, and unfulfilled needs onto a single individual, you stop seeing them as they truly are. Instead, you see them through the lens of your unconscious desires. They become not a person in their own right, but a mirror reflecting back your idealized version of happiness, love, or validation. This distortion prevents you from experiencing authentic connection. You are not engaging with the other person as they are, but rather with a version of them that exists solely in your mind. Your perception of them becomes skewed, fueled by your inner projections and unmet needs. As a result, you may overvalue or undervalue their actions, creating a false image of them in your mind. This can lead to unrealistic expectations, which will inevitably lead to frustration, disappointment, and dissatisfaction. Schopenhauer emphasized that human desires, when unchecked, are a trap. Our desires for external sources of happiness lead us into relationships where we expect others to fulfill us, often unfairly. We place on others the heavy burden of our own need, creating an unhealthy dynamic where we demand more than they are capable of providing. This dynamic leads to conflict, emotional exhaustion, and, ultimately, the dissolution of genuine connection. The more you chase after external validation, the more your self-worth becomes fragile. You are at the mercy of others' opinions, approval, and attention. If this person occupies your thoughts constantly, it may mean that you are seeking validation from them, or even from the relationship itself. The fixation becomes a need to be seen, understood, and valued, but this is an inherently unstable foundation for happiness. Jean-Paul Sartre once spoke of the look, the way others define us by their gaze, and how that external judgment traps us in a cycle of seeking approval. When you constantly seek validation from someone, you are giving them power over your emotional state. You are defining yourself by how they see you, allowing them to dictate your sense of worth and happiness. This leaves you vulnerable and dependent on them for your emotional survival. The more you seek validation, the more you tie your identity to the other person. You become enslaved by their gaze, constantly wondering how they perceive you, whether they approve of you, whether they love you or see you as valuable. Your happiness is no longer yours. It becomes a reflection of someone else's perception of you. This constant external dependence weakens your inner resilience, making it harder to live authentically, to trust yourself, and to stand firm in your own sense of self-worth. Finally, the unseen consequence of having someone always on your mind is the endless cycle of longing. Schopenhauer saw desire as the core of human suffering, and in many ways longing is an extension of that desire. When someone occupies your thoughts, they become the object of your unfulfilled desire, and this desire feeds a cycle that has no end. Every thought about them intensifies your longing, but each moment of fulfillment, each small connection, feels fleeting. This cycle never satisfies the underlying craving. No matter how much you get from this person, it is never enough to fill the emptiness that exists within you. The more you feed the desire, the more it grows. This constant longing is what Schopenhauer believed to be the core of suffering. It traps you in a never-ending cycle of wanting without ever fulfilling the deeper need for inner peace. At this point, you might wonder, how do I break free from this? How do you escape the endless grip of longing, anxiety, and emotional dependency? The answer lies in the next step, understanding the nature of desire, detaching from external validation, and reclaiming control of your emotional landscape. This is the beginning of the process of liberation, and it is the topic of the next section where we will explore how to free yourself from this cycle and reawaken the autonomy and peace you've long been seeking. Breaking free from the invisible chains of obsessive thinking, particularly when it comes to someone who occupies your every thought, requires a radical shift in perspective. To escape the self-imposed prison of perfectionism, longing, and emotional dependency, you must challenge the very beliefs and patterns that keep you trapped. It's not about denying the person's importance or the emotions you feel, but about reasserting control over your inner world, rediscovering your true self, independent of your attachment to them. The first and most important step in breaking free is awareness. Recognize that the constant thoughts about this person, the obsession, is not a random occurrence. It is rooted in your mind's unconscious drive to fulfill a deep, unmet need. This awareness is key. You must be willing to acknowledge that your emotional attachment, while real, is not necessarily an expression of genuine connection, but rather an unconscious attempt to satisfy a void. By bringing your attention to the fact that your thoughts are not just random musings but part of a deeply ingrained cycle, you gain the ability to observe your feelings without identifying with them. Mindfulness is a crucial tool here. Instead of fighting or repressing the thoughts, allow them to arise, acknowledge them without judgment. When you realize that these thoughts are not facts but emotional responses rooted in deeper desires and projections, you begin to loosen their grip on your psyche. Carl Jung's concept of self-awareness, or what he calls the observing ego, becomes your ally here. The observing ego is the part of you that can watch your thoughts, emotions, and actions without immediately identifying with them. By cultivating this awareness, you create space between yourself and the fixation. You no longer become your thoughts. You simply observe them. This awareness is the first step in breaking the cycle and beginning the process of detachment. Once you've become aware of your emotional attachment, the next step is to question the underlying need that is driving your obsession. What is it that you are truly longing for? Is it the person themselves, or is it something they represent? Often, the person occupying your thoughts is a symbol of something deeper within you, a need for love, validation, security, or completeness. Ask yourself, what is it that I think this person can give me that I don't already possess? What void am I trying to fill by clinging to the idea of them? The truth is, no person, no external thing can ultimately fill the void within you. That is a lesson taught by philosophers like Arthur Schopenhauer, who emphasized that the human will is inherently insatiable. The more we chase after something external to fulfill us, the more we deepen our dissatisfaction. In Schopenhauer's view, happiness and contentment arise not from seeking fulfillment through external means, but by releasing the hold of desire itself. The process of questioning involves confronting the ego's attachment to a person as the source of your fulfillment. True liberation comes when you recognize that the power to feel whole and complete lies within you, not in the approval or presence of another person. One of the most difficult steps in this process is learning to let go of control. Perfectionism, attachment, and emotional dependency are often driven by a desire to control. The ego wants to manage, fix, or shape external circumstances to meet its idealized vision. We want to control how others perceive us, how they behave toward us, and even how they feel about us. This need for control is exhausting and ultimately impossible to satisfy. True freedom lies in relinquishing control over the uncontrollable. In relationships, this means accepting that you cannot dictate how someone else behaves or how they feel about you. It means acknowledging that you cannot perfect the situation by forcing it to conform to your desires. The first step in letting go of control is to surrender to the uncertainty and accept that not everything can or should be fixed. This is where existential philosophy intersects with practical liberation. Jean-Paul Sartre emphasized that true freedom comes from accepting the inherent uncertainty of life. By letting go of the desire to control every aspect of your existence, you free yourself from the paradox of perfectionism, the need to have everything fit into a predefined, idealized structure. Accepting uncertainty and imperfection is liberating. It is the recognition that you don't need to control everything to be okay. The paradox is that once you stop trying to control your circumstances, you begin to feel a deep sense of peace and autonomy. To break free from the fixation on someone, it's essential to reclaim your inner life, to reconnect with the aspects of yourself that have been neglected or overshadowed by the obsession. When we become fixated on someone, we lose touch with our own needs, desires, and ambitions. We become consumed with thoughts of them, forgetting that we are multifaceted beings with our own interests, passions, and dreams. Reconnecting with yourself requires time and introspection. Take the time to rediscover what brings you joy and fulfillment, independent of this person. What are the activities, hobbies, or goals that make you feel alive? What do you love to do when you are alone and not seeking validation from others? This is the process of self-renewal, a return to your authentic self. This step also involves nurturing your relationships with others. Often, perfectionism and emotional fixation can isolate us, leaving us feeling as though our worth is tied to one person. But when we allow ourselves to expand our emotional connections, to engage with friends, family, and new experiences, we rediscover the richness of human interaction that doesn't hinge on a single relationship. True connection, true fulfillment, comes when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with others, to engage with life without the fear of rejection or judgment. The final step in breaking free from the grip of obsession and perfectionism is to shift the focus to self-actualization, to create a life centered around your own growth and fulfillment. Rather than chasing after a person or an external goal, begin to pursue personal goals that are aligned with your core values and aspirations. What makes you feel fully alive, expressed, and authentic? This can be a new career, a creative pursuit, a personal project, or simply taking time to be present in your own life. The shift away from seeking fulfillment in others allows you to create a life centered around self-empowerment. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, emphasizes that fulfillment and happiness arise not from the pursuit of external desires, but from the search for meaning in life. When we focus on creating a meaningful existence, one that aligns with our true self, happiness becomes a byproduct, not a goal. The external world may never fully satisfy us, but by focusing on meaningful self-actualization, we begin to find fulfillment in the journey, not the destination. As you shift your focus from perfectionism and emotional dependency to self-empowerment, you reclaim the freedom to live on your own terms. You learn that happiness is not the absence of desire or attachment, but the ability to live with and through them without being consumed by them. This freedom is not about erasing feelings or denying your emotions. It is about finding balance and living in a way that honors who you are, independent of external approval. The rebellion against perfectionism and emotional obsession is not a single moment of epiphany, but an ongoing journey of awareness, self-acceptance, and inner peace. Once you break free from the myth of perfection, you begin to live with a sense of freedom, where happiness is not defined by the world outside, but by the inner peace you cultivate within. At long last, the final realization, the truth that will shift everything. After all the striving, all the seeking, and all the emotional turmoil, the answer is simple yet profound. The key to peace and happiness lies not in the pursuit of perfection, but in the acceptance of imperfection. This truth changes everything. All the suffering caused by the endless chase for external approval, the constant longing for validation, and the exhaustion from trying to be someone you're not, all of it begins to dissolve once you understand this. The myth of perfection is just that, a myth. It's an illusion, a mirage that keeps you chasing an unattainable ideal while depriving you of the richness of life as it is. Imagine for a moment that you no longer need to strive to be perfect. You no longer need to prove your worth through achievement, appearance, or the approval of others. Imagine instead accepting yourself as you are in all your complexity, flaws, and contradictions. In that acceptance, you find freedom. Here lies the paradox. True freedom and fulfillment come from embracing imperfection, not from escaping it or perfecting it. The moment you stop trying to control every aspect of your life and every image of yourself is the moment you begin to live authentically. You stop performing for the world and start existing in it. You stop wearing the mask of perfection and allow your true self to emerge. This is not about giving up on growth or ambition. It's about freeing yourself from the toxic need to be flawless. It's about learning to appreciate progress, not perfection. It's about finding beauty in the flaws, in the messiness of life, in the struggle, in the imperfections that make us human. The truth is this: perfectionism is a trap. It is the belief that happiness will come once we achieve a certain standard, acquire a certain amount of success, or present ourselves in a flawless light. But perfection, by its very nature, is finite and unattainable. When you chase it, you are constantly running on a treadmill that moves faster than you can keep up. Every time you think you've reached it, the goalpost moves further away. Schopenhauer's view of the will helps to clarify this. He believed that the will, while a driving force for action, is also the source of all human suffering. The more we desire, the more we are consumed by the chase. Perfectionism is nothing more than the desire for control, for validation, and for certainty in an inherently uncertain world. But what if you let go of this chase? What if you stopped measuring your worth by how perfectly you achieve and instead measured it by your ability to live authentically, by your capacity to embrace life with all its unpredictability? This, then, is the ultimate liberation, letting go of the need to be perfect in order to fully embrace who you are, flaws and all. Happiness does not lie in achieving perfection. It lies in the acceptance of imperfection and the freedom to be yourself. So how do you implement this shift in your life? How do you begin to move from the suffocating grip of perfectionism to the liberating truth of imperfection? The first step is self-compassion. Stop beating yourself up for not being perfect, for not living up to your own or society's expectations. Treat yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a dear friend who is struggling. This is not about lowering your standards or resigning yourself to mediocrity. It's about accepting that you are human, that growth is a journey, and that mistakes and setbacks are part of that process. Self-compassion also means forgiving yourself for the times you fell short of your expectations and choosing to see those moments as opportunities for growth rather than as evidence of your inadequacy. When you embrace imperfection, you begin to learn from your mistakes rather than fear them. You accept that failure is not a reflection of your worth, but an essential part of the learning process. The next step is to redefine success. Let go of the idea that success is measured by external accomplishments, by how much you achieve, how perfect you appear, or how others perceive you. Instead, define success as the ability to live authentically, to grow, and to connect deeply with others. Real success is not about perfection. It is about living a meaningful life, one that reflects your true self, not an idealized version of who you think you should be. When you stop seeking perfection, you realize that the pursuit of happiness was never about achieving a flawless existence. Happiness is found in living fully in the present, in engaging with the world around you as it is, not as you wish it to be. The truth is that we are often happiest when we stop measuring ourselves against an impossible standard and instead embrace the messiness of life, the joy and sorrow, the beauty and pain, and the imperfection that is inherent in every moment. This radical shift in perspective will, at first, feel unsettling. For years, you may have defined your worth by how much you could achieve, by how close you could come to the ideal. But once you let go of that ideal, you will begin to discover a freedom you've never known before. You'll realize that happiness is not a destination that must be earned. It is a state of being that comes from accepting who you are, where you are in this very moment. This freedom allows you to live with courage, to embrace life without the constant fear of failure or judgment. Your self-worth no longer depends on perfection. It is intrinsic, rooted in the simple truth that you are enough as you are. And here's the ultimate truth. Perfectionism is not the path to fulfillment. It is the barrier to it. When you stop trying to be perfect, you open up space for genuine growth, creativity, and connection. You begin to see the world through new eyes, eyes that no longer look for flaws or imperfections, but that appreciate the inherent beauty in everything, even in the mess and chaos. True happiness is found not in flawless execution or in meeting the impossible standards set by society, but in living fully, authentically, and without fear. It's found in the acceptance of imperfection, in allowing yourself the freedom to experience life as it is, rather than how you think it should be. So ask yourself, what if happiness isn't a goal, but a way of being? What if, instead of trying to be perfect, you simply embraced who you are? The liberation you seek isn't out there in some far-off future where everything is perfect. It's right here, in the present moment, when you let go of perfection and allow yourself to simply be. This is the ultimate realization that will change everything. Let go of perfection, and in that freedom, you will find your true happiness. And with this truth, you are free.